Good evening and namaskar. Epidemiological data provides strong evidence for a relationship between undernutrition and life-threatening infection in infants and children. There is an accumulating evidence of the impact of pre and postnatal nutrition. The first 1,000 days webinar will outline the impact of nutrition during fetal and infant development on the capacity to mount immune response to infection. I, Mr. Tushar Atwad, on behalf of Mayor Vitabiotics, I am pleased to welcome and thank all the delegates who have registered and are attending this webinar with us today. Mayor Vitabiotics is the global business partner of Vitabiotics UK, headquartered in London, which is UK's #1 and world fastest growing nutraceutical company. Dr. Kartar Singh Lalwani is the founder and chairman of Vitabiotics. He is a bioscience inventor who has successfully commercialized his own inventions. Mayor Vitabiotics is one of the leading pharmaceutical manufacturers in India. Mayor has created its unique portfolio of products for addressing the unmet needs of mother during pregnancy and lactation, and also in nutrition and growing children's. The first 1,000 days refers to the period that begins with pregnancy planning and goes up to the when the child reaches to her second birthday. Each day of this journey is special and influences the way a mother and child nutrition, development, and growth. This session will guide all the doctors about ensuring that every child and every mother must have the access to information to create an optimal environment during the first 1,000 days for a better tomorrow. For this, Mayor offers Calcimax 500 in pregnancy and lactation, Calcimax Total in pre-eclampsia conditions, Calcimax P suspension in all infants and growing children, Well Woman for all-round nutrition in women's. Moving on further. So today, Mayor Vitabiotics provides a unique platform to connect, engage, and create an avenue towards robust exchange of information on the effect of perinatal nutrition on neonatal immune system. Under the guidance of the leading and eminent speaker, Dr. Yatin Shah and Dr. Shailesh Gupta. Dr. Yatin Shah is a practicing gynecologist and obstetrician since last 30 years. He is also an head of the department. Also, Dr. Yatin Shah is Honorable Professor of Gynecology at Dr. R.N. Cooper Hospital and Hitvartak Hospital, Kandivali. He is an active member of various organizations like Rotary, Association of Gynecology, IMA, MMA, MOKS, and DMB. Dr. Yatin Shah has a special interest in gynecology, laparoscopy, infertility, and he has also trained in Germany in year 1995. Dr. Yatin Shah is director of Vinayak Maternity and General Hospital, multi-speciality hospital from last 12 years. Moving on further, we have Dr. Shailesh Gupta. Dr. Shailesh Gupta is a senior pediatrician and neonatologist at Malad. He's also practicing for last 32 years. Dr. Shailesh Gupta is owner of Ashna Children's Hospital and Arushri Childcare Hospital. Dr. Shailesh Gupta is past All India Secretary of Indian Academy of Pediatrics. Dr. Shailesh Gupta is past chairman, Neonatology chapter of Indian Academy of Pediatrics, past president of Mumbai chapter of Indian Academy of Pediatrics. Today, both the doctors are going to interact on the effect of perinatal nutrition on neonatal immune system. Now I hand over the session to our dynamic speakers for the day, Dr. Yatin Shah. Dr. Yatin Shah.
Yeah. Good afternoon, friends, and thank you, Tushar, for the kind words. It is said that health is wealth, and the wealth doesn't come all of a sudden. Similarly, even for the health, it should start right from the neonate and then gradually goes to infancy and childhood and adulthood. A good adult is only found when the foundation is strong, and that is possible when right from the maternal side, because mother is the sole supplier of all the various nutrients to the neonates. And the immune system of the neonates is immature and not fully functional. Their susceptibility to infections and ability to respond appropriately is impaired. However, neonates are protected against infections through passive immunity conferred through IgG and IgA antibody transferred from the mother through the placenta during the last trimester of pregnancy and through the breast milk during lactation. Now, fetal life, infancy, and childhood, the immune system undergoes a process of functional maturation, and then only they can fight against the various infection and tide over the threat of infection. Now, the adequacy of this process is dependent on environmental factors, and there is an accumulating evidence of the impact of pre and postnatal nutrition in this regard. Now, why the neonatal immune system is very important, so much important? Because nearly 3 million deaths occur annually in children less than 30 days old. Infections directly account for approximately one-third of the neonatal deaths and are like to and susceptible to death from other causes, prematurity, and in our case, babies are still not mature. Neonates show heightened susceptibility to infections disease due to functional immune system. Now, innate immune components are compromised by impaired mucosal surface integrity, lower level of complement antigens, and reduced phagocytic capacities. We have seen earlier that the amoeba had an increased phagocytic activity and there is to survive. Now, adaptive immune responses to pathogens are attenuated compared to the adult response or the children under 2 months old, tending towards more regulatory responses with strong cell polarization and weak thymic 1 polarization. Now we'll see the nutrition and the maternal microbiota. It shapes the neonatal immune system. Molecular signals originating from the maternal microbiota during pregnancy can reach the offspring during the utero development via placenta and after birth through maternal milk. These signals contribute to immune development in the offspring and have effects on processes including the expansion of innate immune regulations. एक सेकंड मैं तो फोन बंद कर देना मेरा फोन किधर है जस्ट क्लोज. The development of intestinal epithelial cells, mucous development, the expression of antibiotics. Many of these effects are dependent on maternal antibodies. In addition, metabolites that originate directly from the maternal diet or that originate from the maternal diet are further processed by the microbiota and can be transferred to the offspring and may potentially alter the immunity. Now here we can see that the maternal microbiota and the nutritional influence and produce various antibodies. It passes through the placenta to the neonates, and then the neonates, there is an expansion of the gut immune cells, development into the intestinal system. Now, maternal stress, it weakens the maternal and offspring immunity. How? Maternal stress, such as malnutrition, it induces the release of ACTH or adrenocorticotropic hormone from the pituitary gland, which in turn increases the corticosteroid secretion. And as a corticosteroid is well-known immune suppression. Whenever even we have seen that in renal transplant or everything, the immune system is suppressed. So the same thing happens here also, and the children, their immunity is suppressed. Now, what will strengthen and increase the neonate immune system? There are various micronutrients in maternal and neonatal which are helpful for the immunity. Alongside the protein energy nutrition, micronutrient status is an important determinant of immune system. Different micronutrients have numerous roles in immune responses, and individual micronutrient deficiency can lead to immunocompromise in infants. Now, maternal deficiency of certain micronutrients is reported to permanently affect the immune system. Now, changes in the epigenetic regulation of immune system development have bear linked to various pathological conditions, and among them are the allergic risk and the asthma development. Fat-soluble vitamins may also play important role in cell-mediated and numerous immune responses. Micronutrients have a major impact on immune response through antioxidant activities and modulation of cytokine expression. Antioxidant enzymes require trace metals for biological activity, and these enzymes reactions protect against oxidative damage caused by the free radical formation during immune response and other biological reactions. Intracellular redox balance has a signaling role in immune cell development and function, and the antioxidant effect of micronutrients regulate the cytokine production. We have seen in corona that cytokine storm occurs, and as a result of which the multi-system and the multi-organ development also is a compromise. Now, need for micronutrient supplementation during pregnancy and lactation for immunity cannot be overstressed. Micronutrient deficiencies are estimated to affect approximately 2 billion people worldwide. It's a very big figure. They are often particularly severe in women of reproductive age due to the high demands in pregnancy and lactation. Now, optimization of micronutrient levels in pregnant women has therefore been proposed as a strategy to enhance neonatal immunity. Healthy mother gives healthy fetus. The various macronutrients that, as we see, the chief among them is the calcium, and the maternal health. Calcium supplementation in pregnancy has the potential to reduce the adverse gestational outcome, in particularly by decreasing the risk of developing hypertensive disorders, which is now a major killer in any antenatal woman, because it leads to preeclampsia, preterm birth, low birth weight, postpartum hemorrhage after delivery, short-term bone changes, and osteoporosis and pregnancy. Now, vitamin D is also very important. After calcium and the vitamin D metabolism, they are hand in hand. The critical role of vitamin D as a regulator of calcium homeostasis in growing children and the impact of vitamin D deficiency on bone mineral density. The bones are soft and pliable if there is a deficiency of vitamin D. Vitamin D deficiency promotes the development of autoimmune disease, including inflammatory bowel disease, and is blocked by the active form of vitamin D. So it is very important that vitamin D deficiency should not occur. Vitamin D is an environmental factor that affects the development of immune-mediated diseases. Studies in humans suggest that vitamin D receptor variants are linked to the development of asthma and atopic disease. Vitamin D deficiency in children with nutritional rickets is always associated with increased infection, particularly upper respiratory infections. Vitamin D deficiency in children with nutritional rickets is associated with infection, as I said, of upper respiratory. Now, allelic variants of vitamin D receptor appears to mediate differential susceptibility of children to mycobacterial tuberculosis and to acute lower respiratory infection. In case of mycobacterial infection, the mechanism of effect involves TLR activation of human macrophages, upregulated expression of vitamin D receptor, and the vitamin D1 hydroxylase genes, leading to induction of antimicrobial peptide, cathelicidin, and intracellular killing of micro M tuberculosis. Vitamin D deficiency is common worldwide due to lack of ultraviolet exposure in the northern latitudes, darker skin pigmentation in southern latitudes, covering the skin with clothes, and vegetarian diets. There are strong correlations between maternal and umbilical cord vitamin D with deficiency or insufficiency in the mother and are likely to cause deficiency in the offspring. So if the mother is deficient, child will always be deficient. The supplementation of vitamin D in pregnancy suggests reduced risk of vitamin D deficiency, and therefore they will always gain a weight. Abroad, they have done a study and they have found that if the vitamin D supplementation is in right from the first trimester till end, the low birth weight, preterm birth, everything is prevented. Even the average weight gain of the neonate is to the tune of 200 to 300 grams over the people or the mother who are not supplemented with vitamin D. Maternal vitamin D supplementation during gestation results in increased thymic 1 and cytokine gene expression and reduced pattern recognition receptor expression in cord blood following stimulation with pH. Now, vitamin D deficiency in cord blood has been associated with increased risk of lower respiratory infections, wheeze, eczema, and long-term impact of immune ontology. The impact of maternal vitamin D supplementation on the infant risk of respiratory infection and wheeze showed significant reduction in incidence of acute respiratory tract infection. So it is a new thing or rather ongoing thing that supplement vitamin D and child will have respiratory tract disorder decreased. Vitamin D has diverse immunological effect, including promotion of thymic 2 and the regulatory T cell signaling, as well as increasing the antimicrobacterial properties, monocytes and macrophages. It has long been recognized that children with rickets, they have increased susceptibility to respiratory infections, and recent epidemiological work has hinted at the importance of subclinical deficiency in this regard also, with several studies reporting increased pneumonia associated with vitamin D insufficiency. Mainly, there is no deficiency, there is insufficiency. Vitamin D levels are inversely correlated with self-reported recent respiratory infection. So if you correct vitamin D deficiency, respiratory illness is a decrease. Vitamin D significantly improved antimicrobacterial whole blood immune indices, contributing to an accumulating evidence base for the use of vitamin D supplementation in active tuberculosis. Subclinical vitamin D deficiency is probably very common in all parts of the world, and infants are highly vulnerable. The deficiency may be due to various reasons, climate or environmental factors. Fetal vitamin D stores are highly dependent on maternal nutritional sufficiency, and breast milk is poor in vitamin D, and therefore exclusive breastfed babies should be given vitamin D supplementation. Vitamin D is pivotal in early immune development, and it is also known to be crucial for early skeletal development. Low levels of vitamin D during pregnancy and infancy would increase the risk of neurodevelopmental disorder, and that supplementation could play a role in prevention. Breastfed infants are at a higher risk of vitamin D deficiency due to poor penetrance of vitamin D metabolites in milk. And the American Academy of Pediatrics recommends that all the breastfed infants received a daily vitamin D supplement beginning in the first few days of life. Similarly, another important micronutrient is the zinc. Zinc deficiency is associated with lymphopenia and thus poor immunity and impaired lymphocyte function, including a bias towards thymic 2 responses, thymic atrophy, and distortion of the cell-mediated immune response, which are corrected by appropriate zinc supplementation. We have seen that in corona, a lot of zinc stress was given to zinc for the increase of immunity. Zinc deficiency is probably very common, affecting up to a third of the world's population, especially in the context of protein energy malnutrition, and it has proved important nutrient for immunity in children. Supplementation is recommended as part of routine diarrhea management by pediatricians. Zinc homeostasis in the infant is affected by gestation, birth weight, and feeding method. Similar to zinc, there is a magnesium micronutrient, and magnesium deficiency. Chronic magnesium deficiency is frequent. About 20% of women are receiving low intake of magnesium and consuming less than 2/3 of the RDA. Pregnant women are at a higher risk of developing magnesium deficiency with maternal and pediatric consequences. A magnesium deficiency status during gestation may interfere with fetal growth and development and may favor preterm labor. Preterm labor delivery is due to uterine hyperexcitability because there is no effect of magnesium, so the calcium takes over. It's caused by chronic maternal magnesium deficiency and is intensified in situation of maternal stress. Gestational magnesium deficiency may induce major maternal, fetal, and pediatric effects which might last throughout the life. Magnesium supplementation can prevent intrauterine growth retardation, preterm labor, preeclampsia and eclampsia, and sudden infant death syndrome or the SIDS, fetal neuroprotection, asthma, and children. Now, vitamin B in pregnancy is also equally important. Though it is a family of B12 or the B complex, the B complex is needed right from the cellular growth and up to the neurological development. The B complex of 8 vitamin plays a crucial role in your strength and health while your baby is developing. During your first and third trimester, most women feel more tired and run down because of the deficiency of vitamin B. Even though B complex can come in great supplements, the best way to absorb these micronutrients is through vitamin rich foods. Vitamin B rich foods help boost your natural energy with these nourishing vitamins, and it helps in growing the baby. If we have seen that various vitamin B deficiency can give rise to, we'll see. Vitamin B6, it helps to prevent the low birth weight. It is essential to the development of baby's brain and nervous system. It helps maintain blood glucose on healthy levels, may help with morning sickness, may reduce. Now, vitamin B9 prevents neural tube defects like anencephaly and spina bifida. NTD can develop at the early stage of pregnancy. It is important to be consuming folic acid from the time you start trying to conceive. We have seen so many repeated abortions are given supplement of just folic acid helps in conceiving and lasting the pregnancy. It reduces the risk of birth defects like cleft lip, cleft palate, and some heart defect. It reduces the risk of preeclampsia during pregnancy, and it is important for the growth of placenta, synthesis of DNA, and the development of the baby. It is essential for red cell production and helps prevent forms of anemia. Now, B12, it is essential for baby's neural tube formation, brain and spine development. Together with folate or B9, it works to produce DNA synthesis and red blood cells. It aids the development and functioning of the brain, nerves, and blood cells. It helps to improve energy, mood, and stress level by aiding the metabolization of fats, carbohydrates, and proteins. It helps to maintain the normal central nervous system, neurological functions by regulating the synthesis of myelin and fatty acids. Thank you. I think Dr. Shailesh will continue and explain further regarding the effect of various nutrients and the nutrition of maternal nutrition on the neonate.
Yes. So, Doctor, very well you have covered how maternal stress and vitamin deficiency affects offspring health, and also it has a role in immunity. And also, Doctor, very well you have the role of calcium in maternal health, and during from the first trimester itself, why there is a role of calcium supplementation, how calcium supplementation helps, and also how active form of vitamins helps in pre-eclampsia conditions. So now I hand over the session to our dynamic speaker, Dr. Shailesh Gupta. Doctor, over to you.
Thanks, Tushar, and thanks, Dr. Yatin Shah. A lot of the matter about neonatal immunity is actually already covered in Dr. Yatin Shah's talk. So I will kind of stitch up some of the loose ends or things that were missing from those slides. So why is the neonatal immune system immature? Now, as Dr. Yatin Shah mentioned, that neonates are susceptible to infections, and that is because of an immature immune system. The reasons for that rather, are that they have low levels of complement system. The phagocytic capacities are not optimal. That means that the white blood cells are not functioning as they should. They are not ingesting pathogenic bacteria, viruses, and harmful antigens as they should be doing. And the neonatal mucosal surface integrity. The mucosal surfaces line the GI tract, the respiratory tract, and these are not well formed, which means that the epithelium, normally the epithelium prevents the passage of abnormal pathogens and antigens into the bloodstream, into the blood vessels below the mucosa. But in neonates, there are these junctions which lie between the epithelial cells of the mucosa, which allow pathogenic bacteria and antigens to penetrate this barrier and enter the bloodstream and cause infections and allergies and so on. Now, the adaptive immune responses are also attenuated, which means how the neonate responds to a pathogenic organism, how it responds to an antigen, that is attenuated. So, and that is still immature and developing. And a lot of it depends on the stimuli provided intrauterine, in utero, by the mother, and by the stimuli provided to the young infant or the neonate after birth. And young infants have a strong Th2 polarization and a weaker Th2, that's Th1 polarization. And for all of these reasons of immature immunity, infections cause nearly 1/3 of the neonatal deaths. And infections in neonates also contribute to deaths from prematurity and small podatism and intrauterine infections. Why is this not moving? Sorry. Okay. Okay. So now we are actually focusing this webinar on the relationship between nutrition and the immune system. So nutrients, the micronutrients that Dr. Yatin Shah mentioned in this talk, all of them, the B complex, the fat-soluble vitamins, and the trace metals, all of these micronutrients interact closely with microbial antigens and environmental antigens, and these then affect the maturation of the post-birth immune system. So working together, they influence the innate immune responses as well as the adaptive immune responses in neonates, and thereby decide how this neonate, as he goes into infancy and childhood, will now react to allergens, will now react to pathogens, how balanced will be the host defense mechanism against pathogens. Will this neonate recognize the GI flora that are friendly to the body? A lot of them having been transferred from the mother's skin and from the mother's genitourinary tract and through breastfeeding. So while the immune system of the neonate is developing, there is a interaction between micronutrients, antigens, environmental agents, and that is why nutrition, especially nutrition with the micronutrients, is very important, because it exerts a regulatory effect in molding of this immune system. And this immune system that is developing actually goes on to develop and change until about 1 year of age. And that is why in this period, the infants are very susceptible to all kinds of infections, especially bacterial infections as well as viral infections. And a lot of them keep going to pediatricians for repeated infections. And the exposure to dietary antigens, and this is important, that what you put in a baby's mouth, what you put in his stomach, these can modify the immune responses later to allergens because they prime the adaptive immune response. So when an antigen, a dietary antigen, let's say a formula milk or a cow's milk protein or any other animal milk protein is fed to the child, then the adaptive immune response towards these antigens is such that the body will react to any other molecule that has a similar structure. And that is why we advise that infants below the age of 6 months should not be given animal milk, because they develop cow's protein allergy, which goes on to causing them, which goes on to make them lose small amounts of blood in their intestine and develop anemia early in life. So for that reason, breastfeeding is advised for the first, exclusive breastfeeding is advised for the first 6 months of life. And breastfeeding should begin in the labor room within an hour of birth. The reason for that being that you want to give antigens that come from the mother's milk and that are friendly antigens that will not excite an immune reaction in the baby. I mentioned earlier that the mother's microbiome, that is the normal flora that she is carrying in her respiratory tract, in her genitourinary tract, in her GI tract, and on her skin, combining with the nutrition that she has and she provides to the child in utero and provides to the child post-birth, all of these together shape the newborn's or neonate's immune system, which has an effect on his immunity in childhood and adulthood. So metabolites from the maternal diet, which Dr. Yatin Shah also mentioned, and from the microbiota are transferred to the neonate in utero and then transferred by breastfeeding post-birth. And these impact the maturation of the immune system. So the molecular signals that originate from these microbiota during pregnancy reach the fetus via placenta while the mother is pregnant, and then after the baby is born through breast milk. So it's important that the mother is carrying a good microbiome because most of it, 90% of it, is going to be transferred to the neonate. So these molecular signals from the microbiome, they affect the intestinal immune populations also, the pairs, patches, and the submucosal cells and the immunoglobulins that are going to be manufactured by these cells. So these signals cause expansion of the intestinal immunity. They modulate the development of the intestinal epithelial cells, the maturation of the epithelial cells, the formation of the barrier, mucus production. So the barrier, the intestinal barrier is formed by the intestinal epithelium and the mucus layer that overlies the intestinal epithelium and the fimbriae or filaments of these epithelial cells. These signals also affect the secretion of antimicrobial peptides, which we call as bacteriocins, which have an antibacterial action, bacteriostatic as well as bactericidal action. And they also affect the secretion of the IgA antibodies into the intestinal lumen that fight the pathogenic bacteria that enter the intestine. Now, what happens when there is dysbiosis or dysregulation of the immune system? There is a strong relationship between immune dysregulation and development of neurodevelopmental disorders. The immune system that is developing in the newborn and the central nervous system, which is also developing in the newborn, they're very sensitive to external signals as well as internal signals. External is what is given to the child, fed to the child, okay? And endogenous signals are the internal innate immunity. And it is found that if there is dysregulation of this early immune programming, which, like I said earlier, can continue, persist into childhood and adulthood, in fact, through the lifetime, they have this immune programming dysregulation has been shown by studies to play a role in autism spectrum disorder and schizophrenia. So it is very important that we prevent this immune dysregulation to prevent the autism spectrum disorder and schizophrenia in children. And interestingly, I'll show you a slide later where I will explain that the immune system development in the neonate and later on after birth happens over a period of time. The various components of the immune system, the organs and the functioning of the cells, it takes place over a period of time. So depending on the time of immune dysregulation, when things go wrong, at which gestational age and at which post-birth age, that has a bearing on neurodevelopmental situation of the child. Okay, and that shapes the long-term outcome, which means that we may be able to intervene if we know at what point of time the lymphocytes are developing, at what point of time the thymus is developing, at what point of time the IgG antibodies, the IgM antibodies are developing, and what point of time the adaptive immunity becomes mature. We can intervene there and prevent the effect on neurodevelopment. There is the slide. So developmental timeline of immune cell organs and effective function. Now, this is a rather busy slide, so we can't read all of it, but it shows here that there are stages in the formation of the yolk sac, the liver, the bone marrow, and the immune organs, the bone marrow, the thymus, the lymph nodes, and other organs in the intestines, in the lungs, and so on. And there is a timeline for the development of the barrier function, the formation of the granulocytes, the formation of the monocytes, the macrophages, which is all development of the bone marrow, basically, and the natural killer cells. And then again, there is a timeline for the development of the cellular defenses, the T cell production and the humoral defenses, the IgM, the IgG, and the IgA antibody secretions, and the B cells. So if we know this timeline, it's hard to remember here, but I'm sure the immunologists know the details of development of the immune function. What is important for us to know that when the immune system is being developed, if we provide positive influences to the immune system, the right antigens, prevent infections, avoid harmful antigens, and provide nutrition, micronutrients to the mother and to the child, we will ensure that the child's immunity is balanced and well developed by the time he's a year old. Okay. Now, the focus of this webinar is on nutrition and immunity. But if you look at the nutritional status of children in our country, and if you look at the feeding practices in India, and we'll go on from here, you can see that these are National Family Health Surveys 3 and 4. And, these are done every 4 years or 5 years. And you can see that between NFHS 3 and NFHS 4, there is not a very great leap or very great appreciation. Okay, so exclusive breastfeeding has improved by about 8%. Exclusive breastfeeding in infants below 6 months, which is definitely a positive development. And I think we owe it to the government's efforts in popularizing breastfeeding and talking about breastfeeding, and we can owe it to the efforts of pediatricians and obstetricians in promoting and supporting breastfeeding. Now, unfortunately, in the National Family Health Survey 4, you can see that the introduction of complementary feeds at 6 months of age, that is giving children solids and semi-solid foods along with breast milk, has actually gone down by about 10 percentage points. I wonder what is the reason for that? Why should that happen? Because it's very important that after the baby has received exclusive breastfeeding for 6 months, and the mother's milk now may be insufficient to support the further growth of the child and further development of the immune system, we need to introduce complementary foods. Complementary foods meaning you are complementing the nutrition provided by breast milk. So at that point, when a child is curious about food, wanting to eat, is beginning to sit up and watching elders in the house eat, that is the point we need to introduce complementary foods. Unfortunately, that seems to have gone down in the National Family Health Survey 4. If you look at the next graph, that's even more depressing. That in National Family Health Survey 4 data, children receiving adequate diet after 6 months of age is only 10%. That's a very telling point. That's a very unfortunate point, and that's something we all need to work on. Okay, and it's not just for the doctors to work on; it's for the government actually This is more a social problem than a medical problem. It's just because of poverty. It's because of lack of information about right nutrition. And this is one of the major factors for children from poorer homes having a poor immunity and a greater susceptibility to infections. Now, what is the effect of this poor nutrition? You can see that in the National Family Health Survey, for anemia in children is still high, though it has come down by 10%. Anemia in children above 6 months of age and below 5 years is still at 60%. Not a good thing at all, because anemia it's not a single um, illness or a condition. It affects the entire body system. It affects the oxygenation of all organ systems. It affects the mentation, affects the muscle, the functioning of the muscles, the heart. Okay, so we need to treat anemia aggressively. We need to identify, we need to investigate and treat nutritional anemia aggressively. And this becomes even more important and pertinent for the female child, because the female child is going to grow up, become an adolescent, and lose their blood in their periods, and they become more anemic. And if you don't correct it at that point of time, these young women then get married and have children, and their anemia only worsens because of hemodilution, and they are not able to provide the right amount of oxygen to themselves and to the developing fetus. And these infants born to anemic mothers have a lesser birth weight as compared to infants born to mothers who have a good hemoglobin level. Okay. Now, having seen what is the status of nutrition in our country, let's go on to see the role of micronutrients in neonatal immunity. Basically, Dr. Yatin Shah has already covered about maternal immunity. A lot of it was covered in the first talk, so I can just go through it quickly. Now, the important micronutrients that affect immunity are iron, zinc, vitamin A, C, D, E, the vitamin B complex, selenium. They are all essential for efficient functioning of the immune system through various different mechanisms. Sometimes I wonder, now this is apart from the talk, this is more philosophy, that why did nature create a human being who is so much dependent on these small things from nature, from environment? Now, iron is not naturally available to us, neither is zinc, selenium. They come from food, from soil. The salt comes from the sea. These vitamins are not indigenously manufactured. They need to be ingested. So nature has created a very strong dependency of human health on the environment. And I think it should be a point for all of us to remember that we need to protect our environment. We need to nourish our environment so that our environment will nourish us in return. So be kind to nature, be kind to the animals around you, be kind to the trees and plants and water. Okay. Now, micronutrients, they regulate the innate immunity. They also regulate the cell-mediated immunity. You know, micronutrients are a part of several coenzymes that are required for functioning of the major enzymes that work throughout the body in the various biological processes and in the immune system. And that is why micronutrients have such an important regulatory effect on immunity. So they modulate your cytokine expression. They modulate the humoral antibody response, your IgG, IgA, IgM responses. They also play a crucial role, which we mentioned earlier, Dr. Shah mentioned, I mentioned earlier, the differentiation and development of the Th1 and the Th2 lymphocyte subset. So predominance of one gives you the power to fight pathogenic bacteria. Predominance of the other makes your body respond to antigens adversely, and you develop allergies like skin allergy and asthma and other kinds of allergies. So micronutrients are important modulators of the immune system. Calcium was mentioned earlier by Dr. Shah. The calcium calcium and magnesium together, they are important for maintaining the action potential across the cell membranes. Okay, so unless that action potential is maintained, the cell dies and cell does not function very well. So this becomes especially important in in cells that are dependent on this action potential, such as the heart cells, the muscle cells, and the immune cells. So immune cells to get activated require right amounts of calcium running through the bloodstream. So calcium acts as a signaling agent in many cell types, including the lymphocytes, which are your immune cells. And it is seen that when lymphocytes are not functioning, they're resting, they maintain a low concentration of calcium. So when they need to get activated, they need to have higher concentrations of calcium. And if somebody is calcium deficient, as we see in children that do not take in enough calcium, who do not take in enough vitamin D, have rickets, they suffer frequent respiratory infections. One of the reasons being calcium deficiency, in addition to, of course, vitamin D deficiency. Now, I have, I think, 4 slides on vitamin D. Vitamin D as as a health agent has gained prominence, has gained a lot of prominence maybe in the last 15 or 20 years. Okay, and the pharma companies have all caught on into the game, and you have so many vitamin D preparations in the market. Good thing, of course, good thing. Everybody should take vitamin D. Most of us are deficient in vitamin D. There is a global prevalence of vitamin D deficiency, and vitamin D actually acts as a hormone that has various functions, not only in bone development, not only in functioning of the kidneys, in functioning of the muscles, in functioning of the heart and the brain, but also in functioning of the immune system. But there is a global prevalence of vitamin D deficiency because of various reasons, like some places don't have enough ultraviolet exposure, the northern countries, and the darker skin pigmentation in some populations in the southern latitudes prevents vitamin D manufacturing in the skin. So in some cultures, even in India, the women are covered all the time, and that prevents exposure to UV rays of the sun, and so these women are deficient in vitamin D as well as in calcium, and this deficiency they pass on to their neonates and the young children. And a lot of Indians, and of course now in other countries too, are eating only vegetarian diets or vegan diets. Those are definitely deficient, not only in vitamin D and calcium, but also in the B complex group of vitamins. And they not only land up with vitamin D deficiency and calcium deficiency, but also megaloblastic anemia. So this vitamin D deficiency of the mother is passed on to the, excuse me. I was not charging my laptop, the light suddenly went down. So maternal vitamin D deficiency causes deficiency in the neonate because of poor transfer from the placenta. And vitamin D supplementation, like Dr. Shah said earlier, in pregnancy reduces the risk of deficiency in the neonate and supports a better birth weight. So we should supplement a pregnant woman with vitamin D. Deficiency of vitamin D in the mother reduces the size of the thymus in the child. And it has been shown that when cord blood is deficient in vitamin D, which means that the mother is deficient in vitamin D, which means that the neonate is also deficient in vitamin D, it increases the risk of lower respiratory tract infections, asthma, and atopy. Okay, because vitamin D, as I said earlier, impacts the immunity and the immune system functionality. When you supplement vitamin D in the mother, it results in increased Th1 and Th2 cytokine gene expression. So vitamin D is very important to be given to the mother. Unfortunately, breast milk, for all its goodness, does not provide adequate vitamin D, even from mothers who have a good level of vitamin D. And these are some of the effects that vitamin D has on immunity. It promotes Th2 and regulatory T cell signaling. It increases antimicrobacterial properties of macrophages and monocytes. Okay, so those that are deficient in vitamin D are vulnerable to infection with tuberculosis. And those who are supplemented with vitamin D have greater protection against tuberculosis. And like was mentioned in the earlier talk, infants are vulnerable to subclinical insufficiency, which means that their vitamin D levels are not so low that it causes the development of rickets, which you can clinically identify. But if you do their blood levels of vitamin D, they are less than optimal. And that is why they are susceptible to infections. And that is one of the reasons for the increased incidence of pneumonia in a lot of our children, because they have a subclinical vitamin D deficiency, and we do not run the lab investigation to find out vitamin D levels in all our babies. And here is something else which was mentioned in the previous talk, that there are these vitamin D works through receptors. There are vitamin D receptors, 125 hydroxy cholecalciferol receptors in all cells of the body. Now, some of these receptors play truant. There are variants. They do not bind with vitamin D adequately in some populations, and that is why it leads to a differential susceptibility of some children to tuberculosis and to repeated respiratory tract infections. So why some children get more infected and get more frequent infections as compared to some others could be explained partly by these variant vitamin D receptors. Another slide on vitamin D and immunity. I'll go through it quickly. Vitamin D is a regulator of calcium homeostasis, very important for absorption of calcium into the bone. So it affects the bone mineral density. Deficiency leads to a less density, greater chances of fractures and bone whitening and so on. Nutritional rickets increases children's susceptibility to infections, and importantly, vitamin D deficiency can kind of screw up the immune system a bit and make the individual susceptible to autoimmune diseases, including irritable bowel syndrome. And as was mentioned earlier, vitamin D receptor variants not only make an individual more susceptible to tuberculosis and respiratory tract infections, but also to the development of asthma and atopy. And as was mentioned in the previous talk, the American Academy of Pediatrics recommends that all breastfed infants, because they do not receive enough from breast milk, should receive a daily vitamin D supplement beginning in the first few days of life, preferably in the first week of life itself. This is a schematic of the effects of vitamin D on neonatal immunity. So vitamin D, that is 125 dihydroxy vitamin D3 or cholecalciferol. Look at the immune cells that it targets: T cells, B cells, monocytes, macrophages, dendritic cells. Okay, and it promotes gut integrity. It promotes differentiation and maturation of the immune cells, and it suppresses the autoimmune tendency. Vitamin D deficiency promotes TB infection, like I said earlier, and the mechanism I mentioned earlier. So vitamin D affects innate immunity. It stimulates macrophage activity, and it affects adaptive immunity, the T lymphocyte function, the T lymphocyte numbers, okay, and the thymus Th1, Th2 balance skews it to Th2. So, and deficiency of vitamin D increases the susceptibility to infections, particularly respiratory tract. So when you give routine supplementation to mothers and to babies, it shows reduction in the rates of acute respiratory infections. Zinc, again, was mentioned in the previous talk, and this is another trace element which has gained prominence. We've always known that zinc deficiency affects the skin, it affects immunity, it affects the GI tract, but that it is so important, that discovery has probably been made maybe in the last 20, 25 years. And that is why WHO recommends giving zinc along with oral rehydration salt in the case of diarrhea. In fact, it recommends only that much to be given for the treatment of diarrhea. So in infancy, if somebody has severe, if in infancy, if an individual has severe zinc deficiency, then that prevents as acrodermatitis enteropathica, which the symptoms of which are skin lesions, diarrhea, loss of hair, and increased incidence of infections, all kinds of infections, GI infections, respiratory infections, skin infections, and even central nervous system infections. And why does that happen? That is because zinc is a potent modulator of the immune system. It supports the functioning of the lymphocytes, and deficiency causes lymphopenia, impairs the functioning of the lymphocytes, leads to thymic atrophy. It distorts the cell-mediated immune response, and there is a loss of the natural killer cell activity. And these are all corrected by zinc supplementation. So when you give a mother zinc supplement, that favorably impacts the infant's immune function and neurobehavioral development. In fact, it is shown that when you give a mother zinc, it gives the it produces better responses to BCG and hepatitis B vaccines in the neonate, and probably the thymic size also increases better. Again, a schematic of the effect of zinc on neonatal immune response. So zinc affects the T cells, the natural killer cells, and the B cells. It affects innate immunity, epithelial barrier integrity, cytokine production, neutrophil, NK cell production. It also affects adaptive immunity. Magnesium is another important trace element which is affects immunity, because it, along with calcium, as I mentioned earlier, is important for activation of the immune system. Calcium and magnesium together maintain the action potential of the immune cells. And magnesium is a cofactor in several metabolic enzymes. Okay, many of these metabolic enzymes which are part of the immune system. So they are part of the activation of the immune cells whenever the immune cells have to fight an infection or antigens. So it plays an important role in both innate as well as acquired immune responses. Selenium is another, when you were in school learning chemistry, selenium was not an element that we really cared about. And yet you can see how important it is for immunity, because it is a component of the reducing enzyme glutathione peroxidase and the manganese superoxide dismutase. And the body needs to maintain a redox potential across cell membranes. So it needs to have an antioxidant function happening all the time. Otherwise, the cells die because of the atom O, nascent oxygen. And selenoproteins are components of this antioxidant host defense system that influence the functioning of the lymphocytes and the natural killer cells. Selenium deficiency is seen in protein energy malnutrition, and it is known to cause congestive heart failure. It also plays a role in juvenile cardiomyopathy. Selenium deficiency can enhance the susceptibility to Coxsackie B and influenza viruses. Selenium may protect against cell death caused by some viral infections. And selenium supplementation in HIV infection enhances child survival. However, for maternal supplementation, the effect is opposite. So if you supplement a mother with selenium, that may increase the maternal infant transmission of HIV. So selenium, that's the important role of selenium in immunity. Again, a schematic. So it affects the monocytes, T cells, and the natural killer cells. It acts as an antioxidant. It also affects your interleukin-2 response. It regulates NF-kappa B, and it may interact with viral genes. Deficiency leads to increased viral virulence. Folic acid is mentioned earlier again, very important. That's B9, part of the B complex group of vitamins. Very important for cell proliferation. It has a direct bearing on the synthesis of DNA in cells. It has a direct bearing on repair of the nervous tissue in the central nervous system as well as the peripheral nervous system. And that is why we start folic acid in pregnant mothers as soon as possible to prevent neural tube defects, as Dr. Yatin Shah mentioned.
Arvind, can you just check? Arvind?
चला गया
उसने फोन किया था कि घर पे स्पॉट दिखा, अभी कुछ भी नहीं है।
ये कुछ प्रिंट चालू है
नहीं, देख लेते हैं।
Arvind? Arvind, can you just check? Dr. Shailesh, he's unable to join.
सर शैलेश सर का नेटवर्क का प्रॉब्लम है सर।
I was
Yes, sir.
so I was on my last slides. Can you hear me clearly?
Yes.
Good. So what I was saying is that after having seen the role of various micronutrients in the influence of various micronutrients on the development of immunity in the neonate, let's see how we can ensure that this nutrition is provided to the developing fetus and later to the neonate optimally or adequately so that the immune system develops properly. I'm sorry, I will not be able to show you the slides. You will just have to listen to me. So what's important here is first nourish the mother, okay? So if a mother is undernourished, she will not be able to provide good nutrition to the developing fetus. So good nutrition should be provided like an umbrella cover. This is a term coined by me, right from the girl child to the adolescent girl child to the young married woman and then to the pregnant woman and go on to the breastfeeding mother. So at every stage of a girl's life and later a woman's life, the family needs to ensure that girls are on par with everybody else in the family, and their nutrition should be taken care of, their rights should be taken care of, and at the right stages of life, like I said earlier, at adolescent age, you need to give. Oh, thank you so much. Thanks, Tushar. Thank you so much for that. So provide all the macronutrients, the micronutrients, and the trace components of nutrition to the girl child, the pregnant woman, and the breastfeeding mother. Wherever necessary, supplement with medical formulations, especially for iron, for zinc, for calcium, for the B complex, including folic acid. What is also important is to monitor pregnancy, monitor the development of the fetus, monitor the weight gain of the fetus, okay? And keep counseling repeatedly about adequate and appropriate intake of food. You need to counsel repeatedly at every visit, and I'm sure Dr. Yatin Shah knows that very well. And of course, encourage institutional birth. Why do I say that? Because when a baby is born in the institution, the obstetrician can ensure that breastfeeding is started in the labor room or in the operation theater within an hour of birth, so that the child is not given anything other than colostrum and breast milk as the first feed. So he gets nutrition from colostrum, he gets the microflora from the mother, and his immune system is activated with that. Going further, encourage breastfeeding within an hour of birth, encourage colostrum feeding, and discourage prelactal feeds like water, glucose water, milk and honey and other things, which not only not provide nutrition, but introduce all kinds of infections into the GI tract, which will again skew the developing immunity of the child and will interfere with the early latching and initiation of breastfeeding. So once breastfeeding is established, we need to promote it, talk to the mother at every visit, make her feel happy about the fact that she's exclusively breastfeeding her child, support the breastfeeding. And that support needs to come not from the doctor alone, but from the husband and from the rest of the family members, so that she will breastfeed her neonate for the first 6 months of life exclusively and give nothing else. And the baby needs to be given supplemental B complex vitamins, vitamin D, calcium, and iron at appropriate ages, wherever we expect or anticipate or suspect a deficiency, which I think is going to be seen in 100% of our babies from the Indian population. Monitor growth of the baby. Intervene whenever you find the growth is not as per the growth charts. Even with the slight faltering, get in there and find out what is happening. Is the breast milk production falling, or the child not taking enough, is ill, whatever could be the various reasons, or the family is not supporting the mother's breastfeeding, or she has some doubts or fears and so on. So get in there, intervene, ensure that the baby gets the required amount of nutrition, appropriate nutrition, and it begins to grow well again. And as I mentioned in an earlier slide, that the introduction of complementary foods is not happening at the right time. It should begin after 6 months of age. It often happens earlier, and it often happens much later. You have children coming into our OPDs where they are still breastfeeding at 1.5 years of age and not eating any food at all. So a balanced diet needs to be provided, and this information needs to be given to the parents whenever they come to you for any kind of visits. Discourage feeding with a bottle. Bottle has various disadvantages, but I can't, mention all of them here, except that children tend to get addicted to the bottle. So they are happy to feed from a bottle and they don't learn to eat food. Okay. And when we start complementary feeding, we should tell the mother that she needs to give foods that will provide protein, fats, carbohydrates. A lot of families give their children carbohydrate-rich foods like rice kanji only, with very poor protein content. So they are likely to develop protein deficiency later in life. And protein is the building block of life, very important. So in conclusion, I would say that nutrition during gestation and post-birth impacts the efficiency of neonatal immune system for the various reasons that we mentioned earlier. Various classes of nutrients play different and unique roles in development of the immune system. And the immature neonatal immune system is affected by an interaction of genetics, environmental agents, infectious agents, nutrients. Early nutritional imbalances can impact this immune system development, which can have immediate consequences for susceptibility to infection during infancy, as well as have implications for later life, risk of immune-mediated and inflammatory disease. So the strategy for providing appropriate supplements for the pregnant and lactating mother is essential to strengthen the infant's immune function. And providing knowledge to all mothers through repeated counseling is an important component of providing optimal healthcare. Thank you very much. Thank you, Tushar, for supporting me with slides.
Doctor, it was a very insightful session. Very well, you have covered the role of nutritional status, current status in India, and how role of micronutrients plays an essential role, and how vitamin D deficiency is there in children's. Moving on further, Doctor, I'll like to ask you a question. Basically, Doctor, there are many factors that are affecting neonatal immune system. Doctor, can you
Right.
just highlight the factors affecting the neonatal immune system with respect to prenatal and neonatal?
Yeah. So Tushar, we actually covered all of that in the slides, but very quickly, I'd like to recount, as I mentioned earlier, that there is a interaction between the nutrients, the environment, and the infectious agents that the child may face in utero and outside, and interaction of all of these affect the developing immature system. So it's important that nutrition be provided to the mother, so it goes on to the baby in utero, and the mother be prevented from developing infections, and post-birth the baby be prevented from developing infections. And you ensure that the child gets mother's milk so that he gets friendly proteins and not foreign proteins like cow's milk. So all of these are going to affect the in developing immune system of the neonate.
Okay. Dr. Yatin, what's your take on it? Dr. Yatin?
What is?
What's your take basically, sir? I'll repeat the question.
Take home message. Take home message. I will only say that health is wealth. And earlier also I said the wealth, to preserve and increase the wealth, the health should be good, the foundation should be good. So all the neonates should be given not only good nutrients by way of mother, but they should be nurtured in such a way that their immune system, they don't develop infection, they don't develop any further abnormalities by supplement of proper micronutrients cause. And then ultimately this will develop into full-fledged adult, which will have all the precautions. So micronutrients, calcium and vitamin D should be supplemented to each and every pregnant woman and to the neonates and infants.
Doctor, around 20 to 30% of pregnant women worldwide suffer from various vitamin D deficiency. Approximately 40% of skeletal bone mass is acquired, and within a short relative period of 3 to 5 years. Doctor, despite a large body of evidences support that importance of adequate nutrition in pregnancy and child development. So, doctor, what's your take on the same? So,
You
Doctor.
see, all the pregnant women should be given vitamin D right from the first trimester till the last trimester, and this vitamin D is known to prevent preterm labor and preeclampsia, and as a result of which they will give a good outcome to the pregnancy. And neonates, the transfer of vitamin D3 is very important, and then good bone density to the neonate will occur, and they will have a good immune system and good fighting capacity for the infection. As Dr. Sailesh has already said, the vitamin D is very, very essential for prevention of malformation and infection.
Okay. Dr. Shailesh?
Yeah, similar to what Dr. Yatin said, but I would say that neonates after birth within the first week of life should be supplemented with vitamin D in the recommended doses. So that's about 400 to 800 international units daily. And we should continue that as long as the babies don't start taking complementary foods, because breast milk is deficient in vitamin D. So up till the age of 6 months, they should all be supplemented with vitamin D drops.
So moving on to the next question. Hypervitaminosis D basically range from 84% to 100% among school-going children, and it is seen 42 to 74% among pregnant women. Doctor, how does vitamin D supplementation plays a major role in developing the immunity and also in hypovitaminosis? So, Dr. Yatin.
I think Tushar, we've answered that already in the previous one. He mentioned, Dr. Yatin mentioned about vitamin D supplementation for the mother for prevention of preeclampsia and for premature labor and other things. And I have mentioned that vitamin D supplementation of the mother will provide vitamin D to the newborn baby also. So I think we can go on to the next question.
Doctor, there was a study. Basically, around 50 million people in India will become zinc deficient by 2050. Doctor, please share your views why zinc supplementation is important and essential for human health.
Yeah, zinc is very important because somehow what happens is that even whenever there's an illness that consumes a lot of zinc. So while WHO recommends giving zinc to all children with diarrhea, it recommends that it should be given with every episode of diarrhea. The body does not retain zinc, does not store zinc. Okay, so whenever there is an infection that requires the immune system to be activated, and that requires zinc, you need to supplement with zinc. So if for diarrhea, we give zinc for about 14 days in the dose of 20 milligrams per day. And adults should be also getting it, but I guess most adults tend to get enough zinc from the food that they eat. So that's not recommended as a general measure. But those that are ill, those that are indisposed, those who are suffering from chronic debilitating illnesses or are bedridden should all be given zinc. Because that, again, the subclinical deficiency makes them susceptible to infections.
Okay, Doctor, moving on to the next question. Doctor, what are the risk factors and comorbidities associated with magnesium deficiency? Starting with Dr. Yatin.
Magnesium is very essential not only to prevent the preeclampsia, but it reduces the excitability of the uterus. As a result of it, the preterm labor is prevented. When the preterm labor is prevented, obviously the baby that comes out will be of full term with full-blown system. Now, magnesium reduces the irritability and hyperexcitability of the uterus. That is very important function. Even we have seen that in eclampsia, we give Maxel to prevent the seizures and the hyperexcitability of the brain. So same way, magnesium is effective in preventing preterm labor, and it helps after the thing. If you have a full-term child, if you have a full-term child, I think all the problems are solved. Yeah. Yes, Shailesh.
Yeah, I would just add a little bit to that in relation to children. Magnesium is, as I mentioned earlier, works along with calcium to maintain the action potential of cell membranes of the entire body. And that's important for the functioning of the immune cells also. But magnesium is important for the formation of the bone matrix. So magnesium deficiency can also can cause problems about bone mineralization. And magnesium is important for the functioning of the muscles. So when you have a child with protein, energy, malnutrition, we supplement them with magnesium in addition to calcium and vitamin A and D and other B complex vitamins.
Lastly, doctor, what is the main message that you would like to give to the audience as a takeaway message, starting with Dr. Yateen Shah?
As I have said that all the micronutrients are very essential and they should be supplemented, looked after. Not only the deficiency, but even the suboptimal deficiency should be diagnosed and treated and supplemented. Like Shailesh has said that diarrhea should be supplemented with zinc. And it is very essential that even the magnesium, iodine, selenium, everything should be supplemented. All the micronutrients along with calcium and vitamin D should be supplemented, not only because the diet may not contain everything. So the extra supplement along with calcium, what is called as calcium X total that we have got, that will help you in total.
Dr. Shailesh?
Yeah, Tushar, I would, as a take-home message for the audience here, the doctors that may have logged in, I would say that we have the knowledge. We have the knowledge and we gain some here in the webinar today about trace elements and about, which includes vitamins and the trace elements and how important they are for immunity. My take-home message is that put this into practice. And when you say put this into practice, it does not only mean that you practice these things in your clinic, but you need to tell the parents to practice these things in their homes. Okay, they need to nourish the mother well, they need to nourish the girls well, and they need to nourish the newborns well at home. So counseling is what we need to do more than imparting knowledge. Repeated reminders to the mothers, repeated reminders to the other caretakers about what is good nourishment for the mother, what is appropriate nourishment for the neonate and for the young child. That will ensure that they get their macronutrients, they get their micronutrients, they get their trace minerals, and that will ensure that their bodies develop properly, their bones develop properly, their muscles and heart and brain function properly. And most importantly, what is the focus of this webinar is that their immune system will develop and mature properly as required and function as required.
Thank you, Doctor. Doctor, on behalf of Mayor Vitabiotics, I would like to thank Dr. Yateen Shah and Dr. Shailesh Gupta for such an insightful session on. It was indeed a thought-provoking session from fetal life to childhood and covering the effect of perinatal nutrition on neonatal immune system. I once again thank all the delegates for attending and being an active part of this webinar. It was a great honor for me to moderate this session. I also thank Mayor Vitabiotics for arranging this wonderful, informative session. Thank you.
Thank you, Tushar. No questions from the audience?
So currently we don't have questions.
Okay. Right. Anyway, we enjoyed the session very much. Thank you very much, Tushar.
Thank you, Tushar.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
फोन से 1 सेकंड में हो गया खट से.